Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Edinburgh Bibliographical Society's online meeting. Just make that behave itself. Delighted this evening to welcome Alessandro Grelli, who's a student at the University of Padua and the University of Venice, and he's doing his PhD as a double degree between them and the University of Paris. Paris 1, Panthéon-Sorbonne? Have I got that right?
Yeah, perfect.
His thesis is on military panoramas in the 19th century Europe from 1793 to 1912. He's looking in detail at the role of military panoramas in the processes of mediatization, spectacularization, and touristification of war in the 19th century Europe. He's come to us because he's been looking at panoramas in the University Library and the National Library of Scotland collections. As most of you will know, the panorama was the world's first immersive entertainment experience, invented in Edinburgh in the 1790s. Some of you came to our exhibition in the University Library in the summer. Some of you came on the society visit, and I hope many more of you got to see it individually. Now, the Barker's panoramas are known almost entirely through printed media, their engravings and many of their printed guidebooks, which of course is what we relied upon for the University Library exhibition. So tonight, however, we're going off on a diversion. Alessandro is focusing on the only documentary manuscript sources for anything to do with the Leicester Square panorama. In the National Library of Scotland is a small group of manuscript volumes, which are the diaries of Henry Aston Barker, who was the second of the Barker dynasty, recording his visit to Constantinople in 1799, where he'd been sent, clearly by his father, to make drawings for two panoramas, which were ultimately shown in the two galleries at Leicester Square. The larger of which, I think, and I'll be delighted to hear what Alessandro has to say about this, I think actually counted as Henry Aston Barker's masterpiece, because it was repainted at a later date. It was engraved. It was the one that everybody came back to and the one that everybody remembered. Through those manuscripts, Alessandro is going to be focusing this evening on the panoramatist. Who is he? What is his profession? And what role does he find in society? And I'm really, really looking forward to see it. And Alessandro, over to you.
Perfect. I think that you can see my slides. And thank you very much, Elizabeth, for your kind introduction and for the opportunity you gave me to speak with you today. And I would like to thank also the DAISY staff for their work and all the Edinburgh Bibliographical Society for the organization. I regret that I cannot be here in person due to my academic commitments, but I hope to return to Edinburgh as soon as possible. As mentioned earlier, today I will talk about some specific aspects of my doctoral research. And first of all, I will do a short introduction about the birth and the affirmation of panoramas in the UK, and then I will focus on Henry Aston Barker's journal. If something is not clear, please feel free to interrupt me in any moment. And I would like to focus on this specific medium that became one of the most successful forms of entertainment of the time. And as we can see from some quotation I put from different newspapers, for example, this one comes from a German newspaper who says, "In our times to reach in Pano, Cosmo, Neo, Miro, Kiro, and dioramas." And another one French newspaper in 1881 writes that we are entering in a panoramania. And what exactly is the panorama? The meaning of this word has evolved significantly since the late 18th century. Today, as defined by the Cambridge Dictionary, it is a view of a wide area. For example, from the hotel roof, you can enjoy a panorama of the whole city. By contrast, the Encyclopedia Britannica in 1801 offers a completely different definition. A painting, whether in oil or watercolors, which represents an entire view of any country, city, or other natural objects as they appear to a person standing in any situation and turning quite around. This shift in meaning is due to the fact that the word panorama was originally coined in the late 18th century by Robert Barker, and that you can see in this engraving, and is referring to a 360-degree all-encompassing canvas that depicts urban scenes, exotic landscapes, and battlefields, offering a novel, immersive experience of painting subjects. And the starting point of this story is Edinburgh, because Robert Barker was an Irish miniaturist, portraitist, and professor of perspective who moved to Edinburgh and lived in Edinburgh. And there, and in this city, in 1787, on the 19th of June, 1787, he got a patent for his invention, which he called in French "la nature à coup d'œil," that means nature at a glance. And Barker produced his first nature à coup d'œil of Edinburgh, seen from the top of Calton Hill. And this first nature à coup d'œil was initially displayed at Archer Hall at Holyrood, and then moved in the assembly rooms in the new town, and then it was later exhibited in Glasgow. And here you can see a detail from a small watercolor version of the original canvas, now held at the University of Edinburgh. And the Edinburgh Nature à coup d'œil was a sort of precursor to the formal launch of this new medium in London, where Robert Barker and his son Henry Aston moved in the autumn of 1788. With the financial backing from Lord Ilko, a Scottish nobleman and MP, the Barkers were able to create a new, larger and circular canvas. And this was first presented to the public in a temporary wooden rotunda in 1791. And it was a panorama of a view of London. It was a view of London from the roof of the Albion Mills, the world's first steam-powered mill, and the symbol also of the Industrial Revolution. It was an immediate success. On this occasion, Barker chose to rename his invention. Drawing inspiration from the neoclassical trends of the time, he coined the term panorama, derived from the Greek meaning a complete view, a view of the whole. As we can see, this word appears for the first time in this advertisement published by the Times in 1792. With the profits from this initial exhibition, Barker decided to build a permanent rotunda precisely designed for the display of panoramas. And Barker leased a plot of land at the intersection of Tremble Street and Leicester Square, which at this time was the epicenter of optical entertainment. And the architect commissioned for this project was the Scottish designer Robert Mitchell, who also produced this section that you see of the rotunda. And the rotunda was a ground circular building with a massive central pillar around which two circular spaces were arranged, one above the other. In Barker's original plant, the lower circle, the larger of the two, was intended to house the panoramas, while the upper circle, smaller and situated on the second floor, was to serve as the studio of the artist. However, in 1795, Robert Barker changed the idea and transformed the upper circle into a second exhibition hall, and you can see in this section. The new rotunda opened to the public in May 1793 with the exhibition of the view of the Grand Fleet moored at Spearhead. It was the first time that the panorama represented a political and military event. And this decision was closely tied to the fact that in February 1793, the United Kingdom declared war on France, giving the panorama a distinctly patriotic purpose. And in fact, this panorama was visited by the royal family, and it became an immense success, leading to a series of equally popular canvases depicting battles with France. And between 1793 and 1816, the Barkers produced 36 panoramas, and of these 12 were dedicated to the ongoing conflicts, while the remaining urban views depicted locations closely tied to the wars. They were strategic naval ports such as Portsmouth, capitals of allied nations, Constantinople, as we will see, and capitals of enemy states, for example, Paris. And the art historian Denis Oleksichuk was able to access the bank accounts of Robert Henry Aston Barker that are preserved in the archives of the Coast Bank in London. And from this record, she was able to estimate that between 1793 and 1820, over 1.5 million people visited the panorama at Leicester Square. And notably, the panorama that proved most popular was the view of the Battle of Waterloo, which was exhibited between 1816 and 1818, and it attracted over 200,000 visitors and created £10,000 in revenue. And with the wealth he had accumulated, Henry Aston chose to retire and to transfer the management of the rotunda to his main assistant, John Barford, and then moved to the countryside, living a comfortable life as a gentleman until his death in 1856. We have very few sources available concerning the life and works of Robert Barker, and especially of Henry Aston Barker. We just know that from a young age, Harry exhibited strong interest in drawing, mentored by his father, and then when he moved to London, he was mentored by the Royal Academy. And we know also the main source available is a biography, which includes excerpts from his memoirs published after his death in 1857 by George Ridger Corner, a well-known antiquarian. And in addition to this, there are the guidebooks produced for visitors, as well as the panorama keys. Panorama keys were small prints given to visitors alongside their admission tickets and provided essential details about the panorama, such as title, artists, opening hours, and ticket prices. And they also feature a schematic reproduction of the scene depicted in the painting. In some cases, we also have visual sources, such as engravings, and sketches of the original canvases, like those of the views of Edinburgh and London that we have just seen, as well as the view of Constantinople, which we will look at later. However, one truly remarkable source is held at the National Library of Scotland, the journals written by Henry Aston Barker during his business trip to Constantinople from August 1799 to July 1800. And this is a valuable source as it offers a unique insight into what it meant to be a panoramist at the turn of the 18th and 19th century. As we will explore, these journals provide also fascinating glimpses into British society of the time. The National Library of Scotland holds 5 notebooks in total, but our focus will be on the first 2 in which Barker kept his journal. The first notebook contains 120 pages written in pencil in a handwriting that is quite challenging to decipher, as you can see. The second, written in ink, is much more legible, though it covers only the final part of Harry's stay in Constantinople, and it consists of 20 pages written on both sides. Let us now embark on this journey through the writings of Henry Aston Barker. He sets off for Portsmouth in 1799, at the end of August 1799, and opens his diary with the following words. To a man who has never almost quitted home, and when he did, perhaps never went more than a few days' journey, the idea of going abroad for a length of time, with the uncertainties that attend it, generally fills the mind with melancholy reflections. Under such circumstances, with feelings to rise and to be always happy, I left on the 26th of August 1799 for Portsmouth, where I was to go on board St. James for Constantinople. At the time of his journey, Barker was 24 years old and had never ventured beyond the United Kingdom. So why embark on such a long and dangerous journey to Constantinople, especially when Britain was engaged in war with France? The answer lies in his job as a panoramist and the need to gather material for new works to exhibit to the public. This was essential for maintaining the interest of the spectators and consequently their financial support. The Barkers were required to produce at least 2 panoramas per social season, one for the lower circle and one for the upper circle. And the social season, running from late November to the end of June, coincided with the sitting of Parliament and was central to London's social life. And also, at this moment, Constantinople was a prominent topic of public discourse. Following the French invasion of Egypt in 1798, in fact, the Ottoman government had severed diplomatic ties with France and allied with the United Kingdom, thus ensuring British control over the Mediterranean and trade routes to the east. Just as Harry was preparing to leave, the new British ambassador to Constantinople, the 7th Earl of Elgin, was preparing for his own departure, and the Lord Elgin was an important figure here in our diaries. It was the perfect moment for Harry to capitalize on public interest in the Ottoman Empire. Furthermore, by traveling through the Mediterranean, he could gather material for future panoramas. Thus, on the 30th of August, Harry embarks from Portsmouth aboard the Young James. The first stop is the Isle of Wight, where he stays until the 6th of September. The ship then follows the coast of Portugal, arriving in Lisbon on the 24th of September. Harry remains there until the 13th of October due to adverse winds preventing the ship from departing. He seizes this time to sketch the Bay of Lisbon, which he will later transform into a panorama in 1812. He also takes the opportunity to explore the city and is enchanted by the beauty of Portuguese churches. However, his assessment is mixed. As he writes, though Lisbon appeared the most odious place to me, at first I was happy to find it improved upon acquaintance. And it is astonishing to reflect on the number of convents and monastic buildings there are here. They are the only edifices worth seeing. What fails to convince him are the streets and the inhabitants, because he writes, the streets are abominably dirty from having no regular pavement, a kind of dirt. I saw no one very beautiful. They all seemed to be lazy, hanging out of the balconies all day. I was disgusted with the nasty devils who saw through into the finely dressed, looking each other's heads for life, which they did with the greatest sang-froid. After leaving Portugal, the Young James enters the Mediterranean, making its first stop in Gibraltar, where it stays for 3 days. And then the ship continues to Minorca, anchoring the harbor of Mahon, one of the finest in the world. Nature seems to have formed it on purpose to accommodate shipping, Harry writes. And Gibraltar and Minorca were both key British military outposts. The former had been taken from Spain in the early 18th century, following the War of Spanish Succession, while the latter had experienced frequent changes of occupation until it was returned to British control in 1798. In both locations, Harry dedicated time to sketching, as seen in the image on the right, which he later used to create true panoramas of Gibraltar, exhibited in 1805 and 1808. Additionally, Harry took the opportunity to build a network of contacts with officers of the Royal Navy. This would allow him to access first-hand written and visual sources for his future panoramas, and also secure letters of presentation for the British Embassy in Constantinople, as we will explore later. During his 3-month journeys, Harry made numerous sketches of the surrounding landscapes. His journal reflects his training as landscape artist and sheds light on the romantic aesthetic gaining prominence in England at the time. Here you can read 2 quotes, the first of which describes the Isle of Wight. Harry writes, the south side of the Isle of Wight, by far the most grand. The majestic cliffs have a sublime effect, in some parts white, in others treated with various traits of red, purple, brown, etc. The needles are masses of rock detached from the principal cliff. One part has a curious archway through which you see the sea. On the opposite side, on a point of a shingle, stands House Castle, a melancholy spot for loiter. In the second quote, Harry refers to Gibraltar, and he writes, "Curiosity made me rise early to see a place of which I had heard so much. The emotion I felt upon seeing the majestic rock towering high in air were truly sublime." In both the description, the term sublime emerges, evoking Edmund Burke's 1757 famous essay, A Philosophical Inquiry into the Origin of Our Ideas of the Sublime and the Beautiful. In Burke's work, the sublime is defined as the delightful horror produced by natural phenomena that are grand, majestic, and irregular. And these three adjectives appear repeatedly in Henry Aston's own description. A clear example of the new romantic sensibility can be seen in the following quote, where Harry describes a moonlight scene over the sea. He writes, "This night the moon rose beautifully. It was full, and its broad, rich-colored beams danced upon the unsteady mirror, which reflected them with sparkling splendor." Moonlight emerged as a central leitmotif of romantic culture and evoking deep emotional and artistic responses. It found expression in iconic works ranging from Beethoven, Moonlight Sonata, to evocative landscapes like this one exhibited by Turner at the Royal Academy in 1797, which you can see on the right. However, Harry's voyage to Constantinople was not merely an artistic exploration. It was fraught with danger. Tempests and storms, what he poetically describes as the capricious whims of nature, posed continuous threats to his journey. The autumn and winter months brought unfavorable winds, generating several obstacles and significant delays to his journey. In a moment of frustration, Harry exclaims, "No prospect of getting to the end of this tedious voyage." In certain cases, the wind could push the ship too much close to the coast, putting it at risk of falling within enemy range. It is important to remember that Harry's voyage occurred not only during a season characterized by bad weather, but also amidst an ongoing war with France. And he reports one episode. "We sailed along with a fine wind all day, but that deceitful element at night, at a time when we most wanted its assistance, left us close the fire of our enemies. Gunboats immediately signals were made by throwing up rocks to attack our fleet. In a short time, a battery of them off Cabrita Point began to fire. We were fortunate in not receiving any shot, though some of companions had them playing about their ears pretty smartly." The worst occurred on the 3rd of December, when a storm scattered the convoy in which Harry's ship was traveling. Harry writes, "I began to get better. The day was, for the first time of the year, fine, but the night was dreadfully bad. Blowed and rained as if heaven and sea would meet. We lost our convoy, and on the morning of the 4th, we could not see one ship of our fleet." The ship suffers extensive damage, necessitating an unscheduled stop in Palermo in Sicily, where Harry stays from the 6th of December to the 10th of December. Despite this unforeseen event, the stunning beauty of Sicily captivates the artist, leaving him breathless. Harry writes, "The bay possesses everything that can constitute beauty and grandeur. Sublime mountains towering above the clouds, a beautiful country below, which though winter appeared full of verdure, and a city which fills the stranger with an ideal, majestic beauty." During his stay in Palermo, Harry has the opportunity to expand his network of influential contacts. Among those present in the city is Sir William Hamilton, the British ambassador to the Kingdom of Naples. He was a crucial figure at the royal court. By the late 18th century, Naples had become a key ally of Britain, which had intervened to protect the royal family earlier that year during a revolution that briefly established the Jacobin Republic in Naples. Sir Hamilton's prominence and connections made him a valuable potential ally for Henry Aston, capable of providing to the artist with letters of recommendation to key figures in Constantinople. Harry notes, "A thought struck me that as Sir William Hamilton was here, I had better to introduce myself to him and mention my business, as he might be of service in Italy. I called the morning of the 7th, saw Lady Hamilton, who I found beautiful but rather fast to be elegant. If I was pleased with her appearance, how much more so by her affability. As Sir William was then out, she requested I could drink tea there that evening, and she would introduce me to him. Despite her judgment, Lady Hamilton was widely recognized as one of the most beautiful women in Europe, though also notorious for a scandalous reputation. Born into poverty, Emma rose through the ranks of the high society by becoming the mistress of wealthy men, including Charles Greville, who arranged for her to become the lover of his older and bachelor uncle, Sir William Hamilton. However, contrary to Greville's expectations, Sir William fell deeply in love with Emma and married her. In Naples, she became a central figure at the royal court, forming a close bond with Queen Maria Carolina. There are no rumors about a romantic connection between the two. At the same time, Emma was known for another high-profile affair, her relationship with the celebrated hero of the Nile, Lord Nelson. By the time Harry arrived in Sicily, Nelson was the senior officer in the Mediterranean and a trusted ally of the King of Naples, who had granted him the title of Duke of Bronte. Nelson lived with the Hamiltons, creating a rather unconventional ménage à trois. During his stay in Sicily, Harry had the opportunity to meet and discuss with Lord Nelson, a moment he recorded in his journal. I felt another pleasure, one that every Englishman would feel, that of seeing Lord Nelson who resided with Sir William. The memoirs of Henry Aston Barker, as edited by Corner, offer further insights into this meeting, during which Lord Nelson expressed his gratitude for the panorama of the Battle of the Nile that Barker had exhibited prior to his departure. I was introduced by Sir William Hamilton to Lord Nelson, who took me by the hand, saying he was indebted to me for keeping up the fame of his victory in the Battle of the Nile for a year longer than it would have lasted in the public estimation. As he had done in Gibraltar and Minorca, Harry seized the opportunity in Palermo to expand his network, this time aiming to establish connections with Angelica Kauffman, one of the most renowned artists in Italy and court painter to Queen Maria Carolina. This is probably linked to the fact that Harry envisions a future stay in Italy to create new panoramas, as we can read. In the evening, dressed and went to Sir William Hamilton's conversazione. There was large assemblage of the nobility of Naples and many very beautiful women. Gambling went on to a great extent, in which Lady Hamilton and Lord Nelson were principal actors. I pitied Lord Nelson. He seemed quite tired of the noise and bustle, which was very great. The hero of the Nile, sitting by Lady Hamilton, was every moment dropping asleep and reminding me not a little of Hercules and Downfall. Before the battle began, Lord Nelson introduced me to Sir William, who I found very affable and kind, assuring me that I should have every assistance in his power. I was introduced also to Miss Knight and to the daughter of Admiral Knight, a lady who draws extremely well and being intimately acquainted with Angelica Kauffman. It's to write to her that I may have every possible attention paid me at Rome. Henry Barker's journal is a valuable source not only for its artistic insights, but also for its depiction of the daily lives of the Hamiltons. Through his observations, we gain intimate portraits of Lady Emma, Lord Nelson, and Sir William. Harry particularly admires Sir William's love for the ancient art. We can read that on the 9th of December, stayed on board at dinner time when I went to Sir William. I found Lady Hamilton sitting at a small wheel spinning, and an Italian princess busy with a spindle and distaff. Lord Nelson then came into the room, with whom I had a little conversation. We soon went to dinner. Lord Nelson sat on Lady Hamilton's right, and she cut his meat. He was very lively. He amused himself after dinner, teaching the princess to say "damn your eyes" for an English blessing. A quarter of an hour after dinner, we all rose from table as Sir William showed me some curious and beautiful remains of the antique gems. Also a head of Lady Hamilton on pebble in a very masterly style, revolving anything of the kind either ancient or modern. Indeed, it is impossible to have a finer subject than her ladyship, as her face is beautiful and her taste in dress extremely elegant. He next let me see a battle cut out of rock crystal dug from the ruins of Augustus' palaces. Henry Aston receives a warm welcome from the Hamiltons, making a strong impression also on Lord Nelson. He also forms a connection with Nelson's secretary, John Tyson. He writes, I forgot that I saw Lord Nelson's secretary, Mr. Tyson, who knows my father very well. He was on board the Hannibal in the fleet at Peathead. The boat made the signal for sailing shortly after. When I took my leave, not without regret, I had been so kindly treated. Lord Nelson, Lady Hamilton, and Sir William shook hands with me and wished me every happiness. Thanks to this contact, when Henry will open the panorama of the Battle of Copenhagen won by Nelson in London in 1802, he will manage to secure a letter from Lord Nelson in which he praises the panorama. And Barker will use this letter for promotional purposes by printing it on the panorama key that you can see on the right. And in this letter, Nelson writes, I have no scruple in saying that I consider the panorama of the Battle of Copenhagen the most accurate depiction of any event I have ever seen. And this is the only official endorsement Nelson gave to a public spectacle before his death. So it's really interesting. Finally, after 4 months of a journey full of dangers, Henry Aston Barker arrived in Constantinople on the 4th of January, 1800. And he will stay in this city for 6 months until the end of July. He writes, to our general joy, sailed into Constantinople. Those ended a voyage replete with variety of incidents in which I met enough to make me dislike the sea, and to pity those who are obliged to meet life rough and smooth as it runs upon its deceitful surface. Barker immediately sets out to find the ideal vantage point for an elevated view of the city to use for his panorama. On the 13th, he identifies the Galata Tower, a medieval Genoese structure that overlooks the district of Pera, as the perfect location. He writes, being rather fine, went to the Tower of Galata, built by the Genoese, from whence I found the view very extensive, and as it seemed the only place from which I could conveniently draw, I fixed it as my station. This district of Pera was known as the Western District of Constantinople because it was inhabited by the Christian population, primarily Greeks, Armenians, and Venetians, and it housed the embassies of European powers, including the British one. Henry stayed in Pera, where he became part of the embassy circles, establishing a crucial network of contacts. These connections were essential for obtaining permission from the Muslim authorities to access the Galata Tower. Initially, he reached out to the British ambassador, Lord Elgin, who is known for the affair of the Parthenon marbles now at the British Museum. At first, Lord Elgin showed little interest in Barker, but once he understood the purpose of his mission, his attitude shifted, and Henry Aston eventually became his friend. We can read on the 5th of January, he went to the English palace where, after divine service, I saw Lord Elgin and gave him several letters. His lordship took no notice of my business and very little of myself. However, on the 6th of January, went in the morning to Lord Elgin. With some papers, his lordship asked a good deal concerning my business and was very friendly. He begged me to dine with him on Wednesday, after which I dined at Mr. Horton's, a merchant here. He is a gentleman of great information, and I spent a much agreeable day. Having lived along with the Turks, he is well acquainted with these customs. Once he had gained Lord Elgin's favor, Henry Aston reached out to John Spencer Smith, the secretary of the British Embassy in Constantinople, and he requested him the necessary permits to access the Galata Tower. However, after consulting with a friend, Mr. Abbott, who was a member of a prominent merchant family, Henry realized he would need the backing of another. He writes, in the evening, went to the German palace to see Spencer Smith Esquire to try if he could gain me admission to the tower, which he promised should be done. He also invited me to dine with him on Thursday. He informed me all was settled and that I might go to the tower whenever I pleased, but upon mentioning it to Mr. Abbot, he thought I should have an order from the Captain Basha to make all more secure. And the 17th of January, wait on Mr. Smith, who seemed to think there was nothing further necessary and that he had done all in his power. For this reason, Harry decided to visit the ambassadors of Sweden and Naples. However, it was Mr. Pisani's intervention that resolved the situation. Harry writes on the 18th January, went to the palace of Mr. Pisani, whose interest I found greater than Mr. Smith's in tower affair. He promised me everything should be arranged to my satisfaction. When he went to the tower on the 20th of January, having procured maintenance into the tower, I went to work, but the man who had the care of it begged me to go away and said that I must have an order from the port, that means the Ottoman government. So the 21st of January, went to Mr. Pisani to see what he could be done. He promised me to speak of it to the port. And on the 23rd of January, I received an order from the port to be admitted to the tower. The Pisani family was one of the most prominent and wealthy families of the Republic of Venice, producing admirals, cardinals, ambassadors, and even a doge, that is the head of the state of the Republic. The family had many branches, one of which settled in Constantinople at the end of the 17th century, establishing itself as dragoman. Dragomans were key figures in the Ottoman Empire, serving as interpreters and translators and official guides between the Turkish, Arabic, and Persian-speaking officials and European ambassadors and commercial companies. The Pisanis were among the wealthiest and most influential dragoman families in Constantinople and would remain the primary interpreters for the British embassy until the mid-19th century. I've yet to identify the exact member of the family who assists Henry Aston Barker because, as you can see, the family tree is quite complex, especially because almost all main members work as dragomans. My hypothesis is that it was the Chevalier Nicola Pisani who worked as the first dragoman at the Russian embassy, a place frequently visited by Henry and mentioned in the journal. In Constantinople, Barker immersed himself in the lively social scene of the Western diplomatic community, attending balls, masquerades, and receptions, such as this one in honor of the Queen's birthday. We can read that in honor of the Queen's birthday, Lord Elgin gave a ball, a supper, to which I was invited. After dressing for the occasion, I went to the palace, where I met a large assemblage of all nations, and was much pleased with the variety. We danced 4 country dances à l'anglaise, then those who understood the French danced some pretty figures. Afterwards, the valse was exhibited in perfection. About 10, supper was announced. When we entered the saloon, each gentleman taking a lady, nothing could be more elegant. The tables were placed along 3 sides of the room. At the upper side sat Lord and Lady Elgin, the former dressed in regimentals and the latter in white muslin silver. From her neck, rich diamond cross hung, and on her head a plume of feathers with a diamond sprig. About the end of the supper, the music came in and played God Save the King, and the company then retired to the ballroom and danced a little. And about 12, we separated. Another more social event was also weddings. For example, the one of Mr. Pisani's daughter, who married a member of the Timoni family, another influential Italian family of dragomans and merchants. On the 9th of February in the evening, a daughter of Pisani's was to be united to Mr. Timoni at the Russian palace. Of course, I went there to see the ceremony, which was Roman Catholic. Shortly after, all the company went to the ballroom, and the bride with Lord Elgin opened the ball. It was truly ludicrous to see the confusion that soon took place. After dancing 2 dances, I went away, for I was tired of the bustle. At home, I enjoyed my own reflections upon what I thought the folly of this world, then went to bed. However, on the 17th of February, he wrote, in the evening went Lord Elgin's, where there was a ball, another ball, in order of the marriage of Timonis, and an elegant supper. One description of a ball is enough. Here they are all, only that it would appear disrespectful I should not go, for what is society without interest? Between one ball And the next one, Henry worked on his panoramic view of Constantinople. That was the primary objective of his journey. He began his work on the 24th of January and finished it on the 6th of June. The long duration was due to the weather, especially during the winter months. The rainy and cold days prevented him from going to the tower and from making sketches. Work only sped up in late spring with the improvement in weather conditions. Another reason for the extended timeline was Henry's decision to create not one, but two views of Constantinople. In fact, on the 11th of May, during a boat trip along the Bosphorus with a friend, he was struck by the view of the Tower of Leander, known also as the Maiden's Tower, a Byzantine fortification on the Asian side of Constantinople, from where one could clearly see Serrallo Point, the location of the Sultan's palaces. After securing the necessary approval from the Ottoman authorities through Lord Elgin and Mr. Pisani, Henry Aston Barker began making sketches on the 11th of June, completing them in just over 10 days, thanks to favorable weather conditions. During his 6-month stay in Constantinople, Henry Aston Barker lived within the bubble of the European diplomatic circles, without forming any connections with the local population. Instead, he observed them from a distance with what could be described as an Orientalist perspective. As Edward Said explains in his famous 1978 essay, The Orientalism, the fascination for the Eastern world that characterizes 18th and 19th century European culture consists the creation in literature, art, and academic discourse of a category, that's one of the Orient. And through this artificial category, Western countries, from an imperialist standpoint, justify the presumption of superiority over Eastern cultures and nations, which were often portrayed as radically different and inferior to Western ones. And this Orientalist attitude is evident out Henry Aston Barker's journal, where he expressive curiosity with Turkish customs and tradition, while simultaneously viewing them as something radically foreign to civilized England, and he describes them as barbaric. We can observe this, for example, in relation to Ottoman music. Harry writes, "From my window I had a specimen of Turkish music, which is most shocking. It consists of 3 pipes which make a horrid fall. He also said, the man beat time with the whole forming the most shocking discord, but highly pleasing to the Turkish ear." Henry Aston also provides a detailed account of the Sultan's grand procession, marking the end of the period of Ramadan. He is captivated by the vivid display of colors and extravagance as soldiers of Ottoman court officials parade through the streets. He writes, "Rose at 4 and went to Constantinople to see the procession of the Grand Signor going to the mosque at the end of the Ramadan. The Turks' Lent is over, then begins the Bayram, something like our Easter, the first day of which the Sultan goes in state to prayers. From the Serrallo Gate to the mosque, the streets are lined with Janissaries wearing a curious cap. The procession began with the priests in a sort of carriage like the Araba, but drawn by horses. And sometime after followed the different officers in detached bodies on horses reached a comparison then led." And goes on, "Then came men on horses with immense high white turbans, and then I believe came the Sultan Selim III, a fine jolly-looking man dressed in a yellow pelisse and a fine turban in which large diamond was placed, and was surrounded by men with the arched feathers that I could hardly see him. They were dressed in the richest satin of varieties of the most beautiful colors. It was wonderful to see the tranquility of the Turks from their dreadful despotic government. All the time of the procession, not a sound was to be heard, and the only time they moved was when the sultans passed, they bowed." So we found a description that is rich about the sultan, but also the judgment of the Ottoman government that is strongly negative. And Harry presents it as a despotic and barbaric regime, and he echoes the intellectual tradition of the Enlightenment. We can think about, for example, the Persian letters by Montesquieu. And according to this tradition, and to this intellectual tradition, the Ottoman Empire was a symbol of violence, tyranny, and decadence. So an image contrasting with Britain, its modern liberal parliamentary monarchy. And negative judgments also emerged during his visit to Constantinople and to his monuments. For example, the ancient Hagia Sophia that was born as a church, then converted as a Christian church, then converted into a mosque following the fall of the Byzantine Empire. And Harry writes, went at 7 in the morning with Mr. Hunt and the officers to see the mosques at Constantinople. Santa Sofia was the first, a building of great antiquity and which has been the model of all the rest. It is surprising that a place built by a Greek church should have so little architecture, and what there is so bad. The pillars are sort of Ionic and Corinthian, but very barbarous. Over the first is a range of small ones with arches. And he continues, all the other mosques are like these, only as they are more modern and better built. The quantities of Greek antique, porphyry, and beautiful granite pillars that one finds in all of them is astonishing, but the manner in which they are used shows that the Turks consider them of no value. And another very strong judgment that is linked to his conception of the Ottoman government as a symbol of tyranny and violence and decadence. We can find this in this quote, according to which he writes. 26th of March took a walk to see a man who hung in the morning. The Turks hang men without any gallows, frequently in the street. This is one amongst many. I just sorry, I can't read, but it's about barbarity. I can't see them because this is the option of sharing the desktop. But it talks about barbarity. And in de facto, the whole interaction that between Henry Aston and the local population occurs on one single occasion, and it is not a positive one, because he's accused of sacrilege by a group of women for daring to depict sacred sites, as Islamic tradition forbids drawing religious images. And he writes, on the 18th of July, I went with a janissary to the hippodrome to take the view. While I was drawing, some old women, seeing me draw the minarets of Sultan Ahmed, were very angry and stopped me from work. One of them cried bitterly at seeing a Christian committing such an act of sacrilege. I found it would not do to stop any longer, so with an imperfect view, I returned. At the beginning of July, Henry Aston Barker has finished his sketches and he starts preparing for his return journey. Initially, he made arrangements with an English merchant who was traveling the same route, but due to a delay in the delivery of letters, Harry was unable to get his passport seen in time, and thus missed the opportunity to travel with the merchant. He uses this delay to complete several portraits commissioned by members of the English community in Constantinople, for example, the one John Spencer Smith's wife. Finally, by the end of July, he is able to depart, and this diary ends the following words. 22nd of July, went to Constantinople to get some gold. While I was there, a gentleman came over to inform me that Mr. Duff was to go off for Vienna the next day, and that he wished me to go with him. This good news put me in a great puzzle. I settled my affairs in town, and late at night, I saw Mr. Duff, and we settled our plans of traveling. 23rd of July, dined with Mr. Abbott and paid an evening visit to Lord Elgin. We lack information on when and how exactly Henry Aston Barker came back to London. However, we do know when the two views of Constantinople were exhibited at Leicester Square. The view from the Galata Tower was displayed in the lower circle from April 1801 to May 1802, while the view from the Leander Tower was shown in the upper circle from November 1801 to May 1803. It was the first time that both rooms of the rotunda showcases the same city, but from two different perspectives. From the Galata Tower, one could view Pera and the European district of Constantinople, with Lord Nelson Frigate arriving in the background. While from the Leander Tower, that you can see the panorama key on your right, one could see the Asian side of Constantinople and the Sultan's boat procession. In this way, visitors to the Rotunda experienced the thrill of seeing Constantinople from two opposite 360-degree viewpoints. We have just the panorama, and however, we have a beautiful engraving of the view from the Galata Tower that actually is now preserved at the University of Edinburgh. And finally, in conclusion, I hope that this lecture has provided you with some insight into what panoramas were and what it meant to be a panoramist in the early 19th century. Most importantly, I hope it has highlighted the significance of Henry Aston Barker's journals. As you can see, as you can imagine, these journals represent an incredibly rare, precious, and valuable resources that merit publication, and I really hope to find a way to make that happen. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Alessandro. Now, does anybody have any questions? Has anything come through to you, Daisy? Nothing's appeared in my chat. I don't know whether there have been any. Nothing seems to have appeared so far. It's fantastic to get a sense of those diaries, which very few people have seen, because there's just so little that explains the background of the panoramas and and actually how they worked and how they were put together. Did you get any sense from the diary of Henry Aston Barker's working methods and his attitude to his work?
He gives very little information about how he takes his sketches. He says so just only I went to the tower, or the weather was fine, or it was rainy, or it was cold. However, we can have some glimpses, some proofs of how he works from the other notes, because I thought about just the first two notebooks that are the notebooks where he wrote his journal, but there are other 4 notebooks and there we can find some interesting information. The first one is there is a list of all his expenses of what he paid in Constantinople, and it could be useful to understand also his material life, and also if we have something, for example, about painting materials, something like that you wrote. And then we have lots of sketches in these notebooks. So we can see, we can suppose that he makes some some drawings, maybe using a camera obscura, but we don't know how he could use. But I think that is most probable thing, also because when he was, for example, comparing to France in the same period, there was a French panoramist who creates his own business in France. For example, in France, we have an incredible resource because there is an institution, the Institut de la Propriété Industrielle, ENPI, that is in France, that during the revolution, everyone who wants a patentee has to submit all the documentation to these administrative corp, to this ENPI, and they have to provide lots of documents to prove how their invention works. And for example, Prévost, that is a French paint, and that is the French panoramist, gives a very detailed description of how was the methods, and he uses a camera obscura, so he makes sketches of the different parts of the landscape. Then he do in different pieces, and then he put it together. He makes a sort of proof. He put it in a circle, and he tries to correct all the problems of perspective. And then he tries to do after this sort of maquette, he produces the panorama. I would think so that we can suppose the same about Harry, but he used lots of time doing sketches. So I don't know how if he has a camera obscura, also because there were portable camera obscuras, but could be quite uncomfortable, especially in the tower and in the tower. also made lots of, in one notebook, we found lots of watercolors. So maybe he started doing some sketches with pencil, and then he made some sketches as a second level of watercolors in order to study the colors, because he says that he had, first of all, the outline of the city. So the background, then the city, so the main buildings, and then he goes back to find more details about buildings, and then he says that I went there. It was one of the last entries about his work on the view from the Galata Tower. He writes, I went there to study the colors and the shadows, and I saw probably at the end he went to study perfectly the light. And this is why it's important to have a good weather conditions, because and here we can suppose how he used these watercolors, because it was perfectly to study all static phenomenally linked to this process. And also in one notebook, there is also like a sort of notes that he wrote about the landscape, probably for the future panorama key, because in one of these notebook we find all the description and a very detailed description of the Mahon harbor. So when he went to Minorca, because and we can see also from the diary, he wants to make probably a sketch for a future panorama of Minorca, but I think that he didn't, because he did some of Gibraltar, about Lisbon, about Sicily, but not about Minorca. But we have all a very detailed description that is probably sent to his father in order to have also feedback on a possible future panorama, and also probably to write the panorama keys and especially the panorama guidebooks, because he started with the panorama of Lisbon 1812 to realize also more detailed guidebooks. And we find also something like that for the panorama in Paris, because when he came back to London, he did in 1802 and 1803 another voyage that was in France, in Paris, because in 1802 we had peace, so a treaty of peace between the United Kingdom and France that allowed him to go back to Paris and did a panorama of Paris. And then in one of these notebooks we find some notes about his sketches in Paris. So yeah.
Okay, so the question from Graham Lyle. Oh, hang on, it's just slipped out of my feed, out of the way. Were there any comments? Was there any feedback ever from anybody on the panorama, from people who came from Constantinople? Do we have any reviews of the London panorama of Constantinople from anybody who was properly familiar with Constantinople?
I found only some reviews. For example, when he finished his drawings, he makes sort of fit check from a sort of general check from his friends and from the circle of the embassy, because he wants to show his drawings and sketches to the consul, to Lord Elgin, to Spencer Smith, to Mr. Abbott. And then it is interesting, he gives drawings also to a sort of he calls it a Rais Effendi. So he was one of the nobles of Turkish nobles in the Constantinople court, and he was quite impressed by the sketches and invited him for dinner. It is the only one occasion that he had a sort of relationship with a local, but coming from the upper side, probably somebody who was connected to European diplomatic circles, because in that time Selim III tried to modernize in a Western style the Ottoman court. So Henry Aston writes that he doesn't speak French, and he doesn't speak, of course, Turkish or Persian. So he speaks only English. So if you have a conversation with him, the consequence that this Turkish noble speaks English. So yeah.
Ah, Graham has come back and clarified what he meant. What he said is, did the locals ever have a chance to see the panoramas and react to them?
Okay, so this is one time only just for an incident, because Harry writes that one day he was doing it was a windy day, so a piece of his paper go away, finished in a garden of a local native. It would be quite a problem, quite a phenomenon, he says. So it is a problem. The only person that we know got the possibility to see the sketches is this noble coming from the Ottoman court that is linked to the embassies. Probably then, if somebody went to London to see, can probably come from the Constantinople embassies. We have to check with the advertisements on newspapers and something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, Graham, did you mean, did locals ever get the chance to see the panoramas in general, or very specifically the Constantinople ones?
Mm.
Hoping that there might be some typing there. We'll give him a minute, because of course certainly the first panoramas that were produced the very first panoramas they produced were always done of places that the people they were showing them to would have known. Oh, it was just the Constantinople ones he was talking about.
Okay.
Yes, I think probably not, because they never the full-size ones never traveled that far. And his sketches would
the only ones
been...
that could see them, I think, it would be only from the embassy.
Yeah.
So if it was some diplomatic, some ambassadors in London.
Yeah.
But
yes, I don't think they could ever have been seen in Constantinople. And they would have been too incomplete, I think, when he left, for anybody to have made much sense of them. Because there would have been sketches, but not a complete panorama.
Yeah, I know that, for example, during my research, I found, especially from the mid-century, that lots of diplomatic circles went to the panorama as like a form of their visit, of their official visit. For example, in France, Napoleon III used used the panorama as a sort of theater of his own the representation of his power. So when, for example, his panoramist, it was Jean-Charles Langlois, produced the panorama of the Crimea, of Sebastopol. He used that for an occasion for when there was a sort of a representation of the Ottoman Empire that went to Paris for a universal exhibition. So they went there in order to view Constantinople, so from a different side. So it will become a sort of a virtual touristic destination, but generally it was for people coming from embassies, especially at the beginning of the 19th century. It was more complicated also because traveling was very complicated. We have to remember that we are in period of war with France, so it's not so simple also, especially because we are a period in which the Ottoman government fought in war with France after the campaign of Egypt. So it was very complicated. It was a very dangerous voyage that Harry, in the first part of the diary, writes a lot about all the dangers, and he was not so happy to be traveling to Constantinople.
There's another question from Robert Lorry, which was about the Edinburgh panorama being displayed in Glasgow, and do you know where?
Honestly, I don't know. Maybe you, Elizabeth, you know something more about Glasgow, because I read something about Edinburgh and different situations.
Yeah, I might be able to find that out, Robert.
Okay.
I can't remember, but it might well be in my notes somewhere. But
maybe I have to check it. But
no, I did have notes of a lot of things like newspaper reviews and things, which might just mention it.
Yeah, because newspapers are one of the main sources. For example, I'm talking about my research. Newspapers are one of the main sources in order to trace also the movements of panoramas, because generally we have lots of advertisements that we say where were exhibited and in which time of the year, what prices and something like that. So the main way to check this thing is to use advertisements. They are one of the most precious sources, because about, for example, talking about military panoramas, I have very few visual sources of what happened, for example, about all the panoramas, all the world panoramas really painted by the Barkers. We have just very few panorama keys and nothing more. We have some engravings. The more precious are the engravings that are linked to Constantinople, London, Edinburgh. We have some plates, some engravings related to the battlefield of Waterloo, but it is just the battlefield after the war, because the battlefield of Waterloo became sort of a touristic destination since the day after the battle. So we have something that was useful to orientate in the battlefield, but we have not any images of the but we have some images at the War Museum in London about Robert Kirk Porter's panorama, for example, the Battle of Alexandria. We have some sketches and some canvases, but some pieces of canvases, but we have very few visual sources related to military panoramas. So we have to use all the sources that we have in order to understand how they were viewed, how they were exhibited. And so newspapers one of the main sources, and if we are lucky enough, we can have like in this case, sources produced by the panoramists themselves.
Right. Has anybody else got any more questions? No? It is a bit difficult with everybody having to type, but so I think all that remains is for us to give Alessandro a hearty appreciation, and thank everybody for coming, and draw the meeting to a close. Our next meeting, I have forgotten to look up the date of, which is in February. I think somebody's, yes, here we are. 20th of February, our next meeting. In the university library. We'll make sure that instructions come out on the email that goes out beforehand, and it will be streamed online. And Anna Pike is going to be talking about the manuscript of Esther Ingalls, and we really hope to see you all there. Thank you very much indeed. And there are things coming in the chat if you can see them.
Thank you very much.